So this is the last section of photosynthesis, which is 8.4, only one page, page 181. And this is about understanding what happens to the product of photosynthesis, which is the G3P. So life depends on photosynthesis. This is a very bold statement. So let's see whether this is true or not. The first thing is photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide, water, sunlight, and makes oxygen and carbohydrates, right? So it's already giving us the oxygen we need for our survival. So one big thing is oxygen. Second is it's giving us the food. So by just looking at the equation, you know that the two products which the plant produces are useful for the survival of the heterotrophs. Now, before we go further, I would like you to take a 2-question quiz. Again, this is a bonus, 2 points. So the product of the photosynthesis is G3P, which is carbohydrates. It has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So what happens to this one? What happens to the G3P which is produced? Now 50% of the G3P is converted into glucose, and it is used by the plant to maintain its life. So the glucose goes into mitochondria, and it undergoes cellular respiration, and it is broken down to CO2 plus H2O plus ATP, and this ATP is used to maintain life, for growth and repair, and also for the survival of the organism itself. So the glucose is used as the food by the plant. So 50% of the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is used by the plant. Then the rest of it will take nitrates, sulfates, and other minor nutrients and form amino acids. So carbohydrates, you add nitrogen and sulfur, you get different types of amino acids, and these amino acids are combined to form proteins, and the proteins, several of them are enzymes which are very, very important, as we know. We have studied this in chapter 1 or 2 somewhere. So the G3P will be the source to make proteins. Now, G3P also will combine with phosphates to make DNA and RNA. When the cells divide, the new DNA comes from this G3P, and also the RNA, which helps in protein synthesis. G3P also can be converted into phospholipids, which is taking phosphate, which is your cell membranes. So as the cell grows, the cell membrane comes from the G3P, which is converted into phospholipids, or it can be converted into fatty acid, which is a high energy molecules. We usually get this from seeds, most of them, seed oils. That's our oils we get, and steroids, which are phytosterols, which are very important in the function of the organisms. Now G3P also can be combined with another G3P, can form different types of carbohydrates like glucose, sucrose. Again, sucrose can be stored. This is in the fruits, in the stems, which we can, in the sugar cane, the stem, or in the other parts of the plant. Or if there is excess, the glucose molecules can attach itself and form starch, and that can be stored in the fruits, seeds. This is our cereal. These are our beans. That's where we get our carbohydrates, proteins, oils. Or they can be made into cellulose, which forms the cell wall of the plant cells. There are other carbohydrates we don't really study much. The plants have a variety of them, and all those carbohydrates can be formed. Now, looking at this big picture, the G3P is a compound which is a product of photosynthesis, but look at what happens to it. It forms the tissue. This is the basis for proteins. It is the basis for nucleic acids. So all the structures of a plant from a seed, as the seed grows to this, the majority of the mass comes from this G3P. So it forms amino acids. So all the things I was talking about, the nitrogen, the phosphates, the nitrates, the phosphate, the sulfates, these are actually picked from the soil by the roots along with the water. And sometimes we actually add this as a plant food. When I say plant food, really what we add is not a food for the plant, but it is actually the nutrients. Now, sometimes when the soil is very poor in nutrients, these plants actually eat insects called as insectivorous plants. Again, they don't eat insects for proteins, but they eat for the nutrients. These nutrients are added to the G3P. As you can see, it becomes glucose 6-phosphate, can be converted to cellulose, forms the trunk, roots, and branches, or it can be stored as a starch. It can be used as a sucrose, again stored, can be converted to fatty acids, into proteins, or nucleic acids. In addition, when we eat these plants, which is a food, the products, this becomes our major source of tissues. So even our body mass, heterotroph's body mass, comes from G3P. So it's very, very interesting. So most of the mass of living organisms come from the product of photosynthesis. Now our book tells us that the plants produce per year, it produces 150 million tons of carbohydrates. Now, that is a big number. So 150 million tons is, if you look at the mass or the weight of the book, and you take enough books and lay them in a straight line, it'll be 17 times the distance between Earth and Sun. And if you remember, I told you the distance between Earth and Sun is 150 million kilometers. And you can go 17 times. That's the amount of mass, the weight in terms of the books it produces per year. So photosynthesis is the most important reaction. Hope you enjoyed this.